And then there were 5. The competition to become the next Conservative leader and your Prime Minister is narrowing. Tomorrow, MPs will be voting again. Another candidate will be knocked out. By Wednesday, we will know the final 2. But even then, you don't get to choose who walks through that black door at number 10, not unless you're among the 200,000 or so Conservative Party members who make the final decision. Despite calls for unity, the competition is becoming increasingly personal and fractious as MPs plot to get their candidate to the finish line. It's getting hot out there. This morning, I'll be joined by 2 of the candidates vying for the top job. Penny Mordaunt is the bookies' favourite to become the next Prime Minister and, perhaps not coincidentally, is the victim of some of the most aggressive briefing in this morning's papers. Tom Tugendhat is also riding high, in the polls at least, after the first live TV leadership debate on Friday. He came out on top but has much lower support amongst MPs. His immediate task is to stay in the competition. One of the first things the new Prime Minister is going to have to get to grips with is the war in Ukraine. I've been talking to Sir Tony Radakin, the Chief of the Defence Staff.
That's why the challenge of Russia is going to endure way beyond 2022 and 2023 and 2024. This is going to go on for a long time.
And meanwhile, temperatures are soaring outside. Records could be broken tomorrow and Tuesday when it could hit more than 40 degrees. I'll be talking to England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer and asking if the UK is prepared. And Game of Thrones star Emilia Clarke tells me what it's like to be taken to the stage in a modern version of a classic play.
The greatest feeling in the world. It's so magical and it's different every single night, and it's just this rush that I can't get enough of.
And poised to review the day's news are Mark Wallace, the Chief Executive of Conservative Home, the closest we'll get to a grassroots view from inside the Conservative Party, and by Jasmine Cameron-Chileshe, political correspondent at the Financial Times. All of that coming up soon in this extended programme, but first the news with Ben Thompson.
Hi Sophie, thank you. Good morning. An amber warning of extreme heat has come into force across most parts of England and Wales. The alert will be extended to the whole of Wales and southern Scotland from tomorrow. At the same time, a red heat warning that indicates a risk to life will come into force in some areas of England. Ministers say they've been working to help the health and transport sectors as they manage the high temperatures. Wildfires are continuing to blaze in southern Europe and 14,000 people have been ordered to evacuate their homes in France. In Spain and Portugal, more than 300 people are thought to have died from the heat. Wildfires have now also broken out on the coast of Croatia and the Greek island of Crete and are also threatening residential areas in southwest Turkey. The race to become the country's next Prime Minister is reaching a crucial stage. The 5 contenders take part in their second televised debate on ITV this evening. Tory MPs will whittle them down to 2 final candidates before the end of next week. Around 200,000 Conservative Party members will then pick the winner over the summer in a postal ballot. It is the final day of the Open at St Andrews in Scotland, and Rory McIlroy is in contention to win his 2nd claret jug. He and the Norwegian Victor Hovland are on 16 under par, a lead of 4 shots. McIlroy hasn't won a major since 2014. That's all the news from me for now. The next on BBC One is at 1 o'clock. Sophie, back to you.
Ben, thank you very much. Let's have a look at the front pages this morning, starting with the Sunday Telegraph. And the big headline there is Sunak vows to ditch EU laws holding Britain back. It says that he's brandishing his Brexiteer credentials as he promises a bonfire of EU laws getting in the way of British business to trigger a new Big Bang. And Liz Truss, very prominent there, an interview with her in the Sunday Telegraph as well, saying that she would deliver the biggest change in our economic policy for 30 years. The Sunday Express, Rishi, I'll scrap EU red tape in the first 100 days. Same story on the front page there. And also Boris Johnson, still a top gun, it says. Boris's popularity flies high in the polls. The Sunday Times focusing very heavily on Penny Mordaunt and her claims that she's never supported gender self-identification, which they say have come under fresh scrutiny after leaked government documents suggest she backed watering down the legal process for transitioning. And chaos looms as Britain faces the big 4-0, these extreme temperatures tomorrow and on Tuesday. The Mail on Sunday, again, Penny Mordaunt, does the leaks show Penny did back gender self-ID? We'll be talking to her later on in the programme. And again, Top Gun Boris has Rishi in his sights, the headline there. The Observer, some of these horrendous images from the continent wildfires. The one on the front there is in Portugal, and the headline is Europe burns. The climate chief here warns, this is Alok Sharma, I may quit if the new Prime Minister dumps the net zero plan. The Mirror, Boris heat ray. This is the Prime Minister, it says, misses his second Cobra crisis meeting, but will party today is the headline in the Mirror. Well, with me to review the papers are Mark Wallace, the Chief Executive of Conservative Home, and Jasmine Cameron-Chileshe, who is a political correspondent at the Financial Times. Good morning to both of you. Let's start, first of all, with, well, I mean, it's full, isn't it, of the leadership race. Mark, you picked out a piece in the Sunday Times today. It is everywhere this morning, isn't it?
Absolutely. Every single paper bulging, bursting with news, analysis, personal briefings, policy announcements, speculation, polling and all the rest. And the way the Sunday Times puts this is knives out in the race for second. And that is absolutely, and how, frankly. Yeah. We have this peculiarity of the Tory system, which means that because you have these MP round that we're in the minute where they narrow everyone down to 2, you get this incredibly intense focus on who's going to be in second, on the assumption that Rishi Sunak is still going to cruise over that key line into first. That's intensifying ideologically and personally, I think, in today's press.
It is wide open, isn't it, Jasmine?
I mean, it's been interesting looking at the tone of the leadership debate, and that it's felt very bitter, and some of these attacks have felt incredibly personal. And I think it speaks to the fact that there's so much at stake here. The next leader will not only be the leader of the Conservative Party, but obviously of the whole country. And I think MPs and the contestants themselves are very aware that actually the party's in a very perilous position. It's lost several key by-election votes. The polls are showing that Labour is inching forward, and there's a real sense that the party needs to win back the public and prove that actually it can help them and it can tackle some of these big issues like cost of living, inflation and climate change. Which
are, I mean, you think of what people are dealing with at the moment, and cost of living, inflation, people who want pay rises, and all of that is very much pushed to the back, isn't it? There's very little mention of that in the papers this morning because of this leadership contest.
Well, in some ways, but then what are the formative kind of issues that are emerging in this leadership contest? People are talking intensely about the cost of living, you see policy announcements on housing, great battle between...
But people want help now, though, don't they? I mean, that's the thing.
Of course, people do want help now, but ultimately the Conservative Party's in this position because it was felt that the situation that the outgoing Prime Minister had got himself into was such that the government, frankly, was becoming paralysed by that kind of psychodrama around him. So it's interesting in the Sunday Telegraph. I think you see a lot of all the candidates write articles here laying out what is notably a policy case. Economic reform, or Tom Tugendhat making the case on housing. All these different things are, they're directly related to these issues, and that's one reason why people will be watching this race so closely.
And as you say, the knives are out. How much damage is it going to do the Conservative Party, all this sort of infighting, as it were, between MPs backing their various candidates?
I mean, I think it makes the party look quite self-indulgent. I mean, people are struggling to afford food, are worried about their energy bills. We've got a summer of potentially strikes ahead of us. And you have these MPs sort of battling over issues that seem quite detached from the everyday public. And I think, bear in mind that the last 6 months of Johnson's premiership were defined by infighting and concerns about sleaze and harassment and Partygate. And these candidates are saying that they're trying to put forward a unified front and a different vision for the country. To return to Tory infighting isn't necessarily the right tone that you want to set.
And you, at Conservative Home, you've got a very good idea of how the actual people, and there are very few of them, who are going to choose our next Prime Minister. It's, what, 200,000 Conservative Party members. You are getting a real sense of how they are feeling about all this. What is their response?
Well, they're a famously difficult group to poll. You know, the major pollsters do various opinion polls. We do a regular monthly and then series of snap surveys from our panel of several thousand Conservative members. What you find is this race, exactly as Jasmine says, is very open. At the start of the week, we published research that showed that Penny Mordaunt was, in each hypothetical head-to-head, was winning every single one. That's one of the reasons why I think she's become a target for such intense, in some cases quite unpleasant, personal briefing. We did another one yesterday that found that while Penny Mordaunt's support in the next leader stakes is staying pretty steady, actually it's Kemi Badenoch who has managed to coalesce more support from other candidates, some of those knocked out, and has kind of leapfrogged her into first place. So this remains very open, and people are, I think, there's a question of ideology, ideas and personality, and each of those has to be right for people to, for people to back the next.
But are the Conservative Party members happy with the very personal nature of this? Are they cross about the way that this debate is unfolding? I
think there is. I mean, we haven't done opinion research on that, but certainly if I look at my kind of mailbag, the kind of anecdotal things people are writing in about, there's some people who are very, minority, I would say, who are vocally engaged in this kind of, who may have candidates who they are more against than for. But there's a lot of people who don't want to see a Conservative Party leadership election focused around slagging off other Conservatives. The fact is that this should be, competition is a Conservative value because it gets people to raise their game, not to tear down their colleagues. One thing I would note is there's a little bit of a bad habit sometimes in the campaigns to say only X-candidate can beat Labour. Well, I don't think that's true. I think there are several people here who could beat Labour, who could be effective election-winning Prime Ministers. And obviously once this race is over, then whoever wins it is going to want to put together their team, bring their party together, get on with the job with an election to fight in a couple of years.
Lots of the candidates in the papers today brandishing their Brexit credentials on the economy particularly. Tell us what they're saying.
I mean, so it's quite interesting. So you have Rishi Sunak, he's arguing that he'll scrap EU red tape. I mean, I think part of this comes down to the fact that in the 2019 election, obviously Johnson made getting Brexit done his big campaign, his big pledge to the public, and that was derailed by COVID. And so the party's really struggled to put forward its Brexit case, to articulate how it's going to make a success out of Brexit. And so all these candidates are trying to revitalise that debate and argue that actually now we're in this period outside of COVID that they're trying to put forward what they will do to basically make a success out of Brexit. And I think for Rishi Sunak in particular, I think he is trying to win over the right of the party, who I think have been quite sceptical and possibly suspicious of him due to some of the policies he implemented as Chancellor, for example, the national insurance rise or the corporation tax rise. A lot of people on the right of the party haven't liked that. So that's him trying to win over, I'd say, the right of the party. And we have Penny Mordaunt, who's essentially trying to recast Johnson's old argument, saying that she'll get Brexit redone. And she really tapped into the sense that the government really hasn't had the space or the political capital to lean into the Brexit issue because there's been so many other issues like COVID, like Partygate that it's had to focus on. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting to look at the topics that are being discussed in this debate. So it's Brexit, it's tax cuts.
And it is also self-ID, gender self-ID, isn't it? And this is Penny Mordaunt. She's on the front of the page of the Sunday Times, on the front page of the Mail on Sunday. Explain what that's all about, Mark.
Well, this interestingly, I've for the last few months, I've assumed that you'll be able to judge this race if Penny Mordaunt is doing well in it by how much her rivals talk about gender self-ID, because this has always been one of the issues where she has been relatively outspoken in the past, where she held the equalities brief in government and where she may be at risk of being out of step with some of her parliamentary colleagues voting in this round and some of the party members voting in the next round. This big debate now is her own position is that actually she didn't support purely declarative self-ID, effectively, where you can simply announce and decide within law, I am a trans man or a trans woman, and that becomes the case. Demedicalisation of the kind of tests, as it's referred to in that process. This is part of this policy and cultural battle, but it's also become part of this briefing war. These leaks now coming out from within the civil service, within government, claiming that actually not only might she be somebody who's advocated a policy people don't necessarily agree with. But the allegation is, therefore, that she might not now be being wholly open about what her position used to be, and that gets really, really messy, and it's part of that wider personal kind of.
And you saw that in the first of the leadership debates on Friday night, didn't you? When two of her rivals sort of almost turned on her on that. Jasmine, I'm going to ask you the difficult question: who do you think is going to win this? Because it is wide open at the moment. But who would you put your money on?
Ooh, I mean, I think it is wide open, partly because I don't think the party has decided whether it wants a change candidate completely separate from Johnson or more of the same. And I think we're seeing that play out in the debates, where you have people like Truss, who's part of Johnson's cabinet, trying to alienate herself from it, but also trying to lean into it. So I think it is open at the moment, but I think Rishi Sunak, he does seem to be the contender at the moment, and I think he's actually performed pretty well in the TV debates and handled the contest quite well. So I'd say he's still.
He certainly had a good few days earlier this year, but earlier this week he felt to be in real trouble because he was the front runner candidate. Last weekend, people thought he was going to get 130 votes from MPs. He didn't top out three figures in the first round, and somehow he's managed to go under the radar. He's let Penny Mordaunt's been taking the flak for the front runner, even though he's actually ahead in the parliamentary stakes. Conservative Home, we're covering this race and we're trying to make sure we give insight. I'm not picking.
You must choose one. Go on. Who would you say?
As a Conservative Party member, I'm personally undecided, so I'll be interested to see the interviews we're going to see next.
All right, Mark, Jasmine, thank you both very much for joining me this morning. Now, it is going to be so hot tomorrow and on Tuesday, more than 40 degrees for the first time ever in the UK, at least that's the prediction. And the Met Office has issued its first ever red extreme heat warning for a threat to life. It covers the south, the Midlands, and going up to Manchester and York. Louise Lear is in the Weather Centre and can tell us what it all means. Louise.
Thanks, Sophie. You're quite right. I mean, they are quite rare, these severe weather warnings for any weather condition, but this is the first ever extreme heat warning that we've had. And so we just need to make it clear that it's really important, with temperatures in excess potentially of 40 degrees, that you take action to protect your health and your pets at home in particular, and your elderly and loved ones as well. Now, that said, at the moment, there is some cloud and some showery rain around, and this has been the last few hours through Scotland, moving out of Northern Ireland into North East England. It's fairly light and drizzly, and one or two showers down along that Dorset coast as well, but they will all ease away and the heat will win out through the day. In fact, we'll have lots of sunshine, and those temperatures are likely to peak this afternoon in one or two spots into the low 30s. Even temperatures across eastern Scotland after that cloudy, damp start will peak into the mid-20s by the middle part of the afternoon. Then we keep those clear skies through the night, and temperatures are going to hold up. Maybe a little bit of patchy cloud and some drizzle in the far north. As we go through the day, wall-to-wall sunshine. These are the red areas affected by that severe heat warning, and that is because those temperatures are likely to peak widely mid to high 30s, but as well potentially we could see 40 degrees, and if that happens, it's the first 40 degrees we've ever had across the UK. Sophie. Quite extraordinary. Louise, thank you very much. Well, listening to that forecast with me is the Deputy Chief Medical Officer for England, Dr. Thomas Waite. Good morning. People are very, very worried, aren't they, about these warnings of death, threat to life during this heat wave. What is the actual threat to life?
Well, your body works quite hard year round, no matter what the temperature is outside, to keep your internal temperature close to 37.5 degrees. That's the way your body operates. And of course, when the air outside your body is the same temperature or very close to it, it's much harder to lose the heat you create through your skin. That's quite tiring. We call it heat exhaustion, and particular people are more at risk of that because it's almost like working out. It puts strain on your heart. So people who are older, people who already have cardiovascular risk factors, problems with their heart or circulation, are at greatest risk, as well as very young children and babies, because it's harder for them to regulate their temperature. But the steps that we can all take are straightforward. Cooling ourselves down, keeping ourselves well hydrated, and for these exceptional couple of days, keeping in the shade and seeking out cool places will all help preventing that ill health.
And some schools may actually close because of all this. Do they really need to close? Because surely that's the last thing that children need after all these these years of disruption?
Well, it's important, as well as keeping ourselves cool, to seek out cooler buildings or places where we can cool ourselves down. And of course, we know that at this time of year, lots of people take part in sports or outdoor activities. Looking at practical ways to sort of keep those safe is important. But that's simply because of the symptoms that people get when they overheat. People can sometimes experience cramps, or they can experience sort of feeling quite sick, or feeling very hot, or excess sweating. That's because you lose a lot of fluid when you sweat, when you're trying to lose that heat, and it dehydrates you, which is why keeping on top of that fluid loss by rehydrating is important for all ages.
But the point is that we are actually going to have to get used to this based on the climate change projections. It looks like we are going to get more and more extreme weather events in the future. The UK needs to be better prepared, doesn't it?
So the scientific and medical community are in unanimous agreement that climate change really is a risk to health, and we need to take carbon reduction and adaptation seriously. The thing that means for events like this is that the risk of this extreme heat is going up. So we all need to sort of think about the steps we can take during extreme weather for how we avoid getting ourselves into trouble in the first place. And that is those simple steps of looking out for one another when it is extremely hot, as well as keeping cool, keeping our skin cool, and thinking about those sorts of buildings and places where we can seek out cooler temperatures to stop getting into trouble in the first place.
Dr. Thomas Waite, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Now, the war in Ukraine is grinding on. The Russians have been launching more cruise missile attacks on cities a long way from the front line, which have hit residential areas and killed dozens of civilians. Britain's Chief of the Defence Staff, Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, travelled to Kyiv this month to meet his Ukrainian counterpart for talks on the progress of the war. I spoke to Sir Tony on Friday about Ukraine, but I started by asking him about the BBC's Panorama investigation into SAS units operating in Afghanistan more than a decade ago. It found operatives repeatedly killing detainees and unarmed men in suspicious circumstances.
So we have conducted 2 independent service police investigations, and both of those have come to the conclusion that that did not happen, and that there is not sufficient evidence to merit a criminal prosecution. And we're really clear that even though these are extraordinary people that do extraordinary things on behalf of the nation, the rule of law applies to everybody. And that is the simple case. That's why we have these investigations, and they've come to their conclusions. And if the BBC has found fresh evidence, we've been clear in saying, can we see that evidence, and then we will look at that again.
But the people who originally investigated these allegations have told the BBC that they did not interview eyewitnesses, they didn't visit the sites of shootings. Should that not be investigated by you?
So I come back to, we've had 2 thorough independent service police investigations. We're wary of trial by television. These are exceptional people that serve their country. They absolutely fall under the rule of law. We apply due process, and they deserve due process themselves. So the notion that we start to go down a trial by television, that allegations are made by the BBC, and that we even start to name individuals, that is unacceptable and deeply uncomfortable for those of us serving.
But your predecessor, General David Richards, he was Chief of the Defence Staff at the time that this is alleged to have happened. He says that on the basis of the evidence the BBC has uncovered, he would have ordered a new investigation. Why weren't you?
Because we've had 2 investigations already. And I'm speaking to David Richards later today, and he's probably unaware of that.
But is it true that the people who originally investigated these allegations weren't allowed to interview eyewitnesses or weren't allowed to visit the sites of shootings?
So all I know, Sophie, is that the investigations were incredibly thorough. They've gone on for years. We are really clear about the rule of law. We're really clear about our reputation. And we've been honest in saying, here are 2 independent service police investigations. These are their conclusions. And then we're saying if there is fresh evidence, we will look at it again.
Can we talk about Ukraine now? And you visited Kyiv just last week. What is morale like there? Do they feel in Kyiv, in Ukraine, like they're winning this war?
Absolutely. I saw my opposite number, General Zalushny. I expressed my personal admiration for what he is achieving, for what his country is achieving, their courage, their determination. And they are absolutely clear that they plan to restore the whole of their territory in terms of Ukraine, and they see a Russia that is struggling, a Russia that we assess has lost more than 30% of its land combat effectiveness. What that actually means is 50,000 Russian soldiers that have either died or been injured in this conflict, nearly 1,700 Russian tanks destroyed, nearly 4,000 armoured fighting vehicles that belong to Russia destroyed. And what you're seeing is a Russia, if we focus on the Donbass, that's less than 10% of the territory of Ukraine. And we're approaching 150 days, and Russia is struggling to take that territory. And it's struggling because of the courage and determination of the Ukrainian armed forces.
But if Ukraine wants to win this war by taking back the whole of their territory, that includes Crimea, for example, which Russia took in 2014. Is that really achievable? Russia is digging in the east.
So Russia started this invasion with the ambition to take the whole of Ukraine. Russia had the ambition to take the cities in the first 30 days. Russia had the ambition to create fractures and to apply pressure to NATO. This is Russia as a challenge to the world order. Russia is failing in all of those ambitions. Russia is a more diminished nation than it was at the beginning of February. And that's what Ukraine is seeing. And then in terms of Ukraine restoring its territory, I think my General Zaluzhny would see that as a long-term ambition. He's involved in a fight now, and a fight to avoid ceding any more territory, and a fight to keep applying pressure on Russia.
Can Ukraine find enough equipment, enough military equipment, enough weapons, though, to keep fighting Russia, if they're going to take this back?
Yes, it can, and that's why the UK effort, the international effort, is so important. That was part of my visit. How can we continue our support, and how can we hone that support to make Ukraine's fight back even more effective? And I'm proud of what has been provided. We've collectively, the international community, have provided a lot of equipment, but importantly, they've raised a standard of equipment for Ukraine.
We've seen terrible attacks on civilians a very long way away from the front line. Vinnytsia last week, Kremenchuk, the shopping centre where a lot of people were killed, and these were cruise missile attacks. Is there an element of psychological warfare in that? Those are civilian targets that are being hit.
Yes, I think it's definitely psychological. These are not military targets. These are acts of terrorism. These are random events where President Putin is endorsing the taking out of civilians and creating civilian casualties. There will be war crime investigations, but what it reflects is how Russia is struggling, how Russia is not fighting a conventional war, how Russia is having to try to impose this psychological pressure.
But could Russia win this war just by drawing this out, by grinding the Ukrainians down with tactics like that and their efforts in the east?
Russia has already lost this war in terms of its original objectives. Its objectives were to take the whole of Ukraine, to embrace that and put it under Russia. That didn't happen, and it's never going to happen.
When I spoke to you months ago at the start of the year, well, just shortly after this war, this invasion began, you talked about the morale amongst Russian soldiers. How much more do you know through intelligence about the state of Russian morale? Are the troops still demoralised, or do they feel that they are winning something?
So there are some Russian troops that are clearly effective, and they are taking ground and they're being successful. But the overall force is struggling. They're struggling in terms of their numbers, but they're especially struggling in terms of their morale. And you're seeing that with the inability of President Putin to match the people to the equipment that he has. Russia's just done a mobilization of effectively trying to call out reservists. It's achieved 30% of the numbers that it would normally achieve. And more they're having to go to the more rural areas of Russia because people are avoiding the call-up in the cities.
What about the pressure on President Zelensky? Is there pressure on him to draw this war to a swifter end by giving up some of his territory, by letting the Russians have the east or part of it?
So I think that's very much for President Zelensky to judge.
But is there pressure on him from other countries to do so?
Well, I think the important piece for President Zelensky is what do his own people want? And his own people are incredibly determined that they are going to fight back with Russia, that they want to restore their territory. And the more that Russia does these hideous acts of terrorism and attacks Ukrainian civilians and commits war crimes that it's been doing, such as rape and attacking children, the more it strengthens the resolve of the Ukrainian population that they're going to keep on fighting Russia and restore their territory. And our role is to support the Ukrainian choice.
What about President Putin? What about pressure on him? Could he be toppled? Regime change?
So I think some of the comments that he's not well, or that actually surely somebody's going to assassinate him or take him out, I think they're wishful thinking. For us as military professionals, we see a relatively stable regime in Russia. We see that President Putin has been able to quash any opposition. And then we see a hierarchy that is invested in President Putin. And so nobody at the top has got the motivation to challenge President Putin. And that is bleak. That's why the challenge of Russia is going to endure way beyond 2022 and 2023 and 2024. This is going to go on for a long time.
And what are you talking about in terms of longer term? Decades?
So potentially decades in terms of Russia as a threat. We were clear about that in our big review last year. I think it's now been amplified by Russia's invasion into Ukraine. And then you're seeing the response. You're seeing the response by the international community, whether that's the G7. You're seeing the military response with the NATO summit.
Let's talk about defence spending. The number of regular soldiers in the army now in the UK is being reduced, 72,500, the smallest number since 1714. Looking at how wars are being fought, can we rely on new technology, on cyber warfare, or do we still need combat-ready troops?
Well, we absolutely need combat-ready troops, and we need a combat-ready Navy and a combat-ready Air Force, and that's what we've got. But what we actually rely on is the strength of NATO. This amazing military alliance, the most powerful military alliance ever. 3.5 million people in uniform, a nuclear alliance, the alliance with the most sophisticated technology and military hardware in the world. And then we play our part in that. And last year's review was very clear that we need to modernise our armed forces, we need to have more lethal armed forces, and we need to have more deployable armed forces. And that's why we've had additional investment, over £24 billion.
What would our armed forces look like if defence spending went up to 3%?
So I think they would be even more modern, and they would have even more punch, and they would have even more impact around the world. And that's clearly a choice for government.
For the next Prime Minister, what would you say is the biggest threat that the UK is facing?
So the biggest threat is Russia, and that's Russia in all its guises when you look at it militarily. So its land forces are probably less of a threat in the short term because of that degradation, that depletion that we're seeing with their struggle in Ukraine. But Russia's continues to be a nuclear power. It's got cyber capabilities, it's got space capabilities, and it's got particular programs underwater, so it can threaten the underwater cables that allow the world's information to transit around the whole globe.
Another threat is China. Well, at least that's according to the US most senior general in the United States, General Mark Milley, who I spoke to just a couple of weeks ago. He was talking about Taiwan. He says that an attack is not imminent, but the US is watching closely. China says Taiwan is a breakaway province that must be unified with the mainland by force if necessary. Do you think China could invade Taiwan?
So could is always a possibility. Whether or not China would see benefit in doing that is a completely different question.
But China have said that they would take Taiwan by force if necessary. They consider it as part of their mainland. Do you think they will go and do that?
So I don't want to get into public assessments of what we think that China is going to do. That is best kept in a much more sensitive space. And our role as the UK military is to provide choices to government, so that if those events were to emerge, then they've got the armed forces to enable whatever choices they want to make, and then we support them in that.
How much is the world reshaping now in terms of threats, in terms of significant danger to the West in your time?
So I think what we're seeing is this challenge to the world order. And that's manifested itself with this war in Europe, and the significance of that is not just the battle for the territory of Ukraine, it's the threats. It's the fact that Russia has either directly or indirectly made over 30 nuclear threats in the past few months. That is what's going on.
September the 5th, we will know who the next Prime Minister is. You will be sitting down with them, I assume, very shortly afterwards. We don't know who that is going to be yet. The field is still wide open. What will you be saying to the next Prime Minister?
So we will always give them a brief on the current situation, so they're aware of where we have our armed forces. That's dominated by Ukraine and the support that we're providing to Ukraine. But we also try to step back and give a wider threat picture. And then we have to remind the Prime Minister of the extraordinary responsibility they have with the UK as a nuclear power. And that's part of the initiation for a new British Prime Minister. And that becomes the focus.
Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, Tom Tugendhat emerged as the clear winner of the first live televised debate in the Tory leadership race. At least that was according to a snap poll carried out after the programme on Friday night. He is the only MP left who has not served in the Boris Johnson government, but he is trailing a long way behind the other four candidates. We did ask all of them to appear here this morning. Only two have taken up that offer. And tomorrow, MPs will vote again. Is this Tom Tugendhat's last chance to convince MPs that he can step up to the job as Prime Minister? He joins me now. Good morning. What does give you the confidence that you can run the country, that you can be Prime Minister when you have never even held a junior position in government?
Well, I think you've just heard there from Admiral Radakin that we are facing serious challenges around the world. And if you want to see who has been calling out these threats quite literally for years, you only have to ask. Because the reality is that I've been calling out China as a major threat for many years, and you asked about Taiwan and the danger that that poses to our economy through chip manufacturing and so much else. And you've also been speaking to Admiral Radakin there about the threat from Russia. Now, you'll remember that it was in 2017, 2018 that I started calling out the threats of Putin's nefarious influence on the UK, his attacks on us, and it was me who called out the different challenges that we were facing in terms of dirty money. So I think what you're really asking about is, do the others have the experience necessary to deal with the foreign policy challenges that we're facing? And are we really talking about the different issues that we really need to get on with?
Every Prime Minister since World War II has either held a Cabinet Secretary post or been leader of the opposition before coming to power. Are you still in this race really because actually you just want a post in the next government? No,
I'm not. What I'm in this race for is to make sure that we get a clean start in the United Kingdom. Look, we've got to return to service. We've got to have the government returning to the service of the people, and we've got to have the party return to the service of its members. What we really need now is we need a leader who has a vision for the United Kingdom, who is able to deliver on that vision and is able to make sure that this country stays safe and strong into the future. That's why I've been setting out a vision of a 10-year plan for growth. That's why I've been talking about many things this morning, as I'm sure we'll come on to, things like housing and things like security in terms of policing, because actually there's an awful lot to do in this country. And the reality is that we've had a hiatus of a few years now where different issues have been dominated by the very obvious problems that the government has had. And so what we really need to do is to get beyond that. We need a clean start, because actually conservative values really matter. And if we don't get conservative values championed, if we go back over old ground, we're going to end up with Labour winning the 24
So you're
election.
talking about problems that the government has had. On Friday night, during that live leadership contest, you singled yourself out from your other rivals by saying that you did not think Boris Johnson was an honest man. What has he been dishonest about?
Well, we wouldn't have been having that debate on Friday night had the others not agreed with me.
But what has he been dishonest about?
We know very well that the others agree with me, because otherwise they wouldn't have resigned from his government, or they wouldn't be standing as leadership candidates. So
but I
don't think I was saying
anything.
I'm coming to it. But so we don't. You know, we know absolutely that I answered the question honestly, and I think if you're going to start a relationship with the great people of the United Kingdom, you do need to answer these questions honestly. Now,
what has he been dishonest about?
Well,
and if you're going to answer honestly, just tell me what Boris Johnson was dishonest about.
It's perfectly clear that the alignment of stories that he came to on the Partygate scandal seems to have been rather more fictional than reality. But what we've also got to recognise, this government has achieved many things. You know, in recent years, it was Boris Johnson's government that managed to get us out of the European Union after the hiatus of the end of the May years. It was this government that has managed to introduce levelling up, not as far and not as wide as I think many of us would like to see it, but it was this government that did it. So we can build on the successes of this government while recognising that we need a change of leadership.
What do you say to people who say that you have just been a critic on the sidelines? As we said before, you've never held a junior position even in government. What do you say to people who still support Boris Johnson, who say that he's delivered the vaccine rollout, he's got us out of the EU, he's been a big global ally of President Zelensky?
Well, I certainly welcome the vaccine rollout, and Elizabeth Bingham did a phenomenal job. I mean, that's a demonstration of public and private sector working together to deliver for the UK and demonstrating exactly how a good government operation can work. And the President Zelensky support is phenomenal, and what the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has done, getting weapons out
You're
early.
Not crediting the Prime Minister for any of that.
The Prime Minister has been part of both of them, but let's be honest, this is a team game. And what the Prime Minister has done is he's empowered Elizabeth Bingham and Ben Wallace, and what they've done in different ways is they've delivered. And so I think it's absolutely appropriate to credit them both as well, because when we talk about Ukraine, you know, I was in Ukraine earlier this year before the event started, before the war, or the second phase of this war started. And it's absolutely clear what we need to be doing. We need to be making sure that we ramp up the supplies, because even now, the Ukrainians are consuming in stocks more in a day than we're supplying in a week. We really need to be maintaining that level of commitment to make sure that, as Admiral Radakin just put it, Putin realises he's lost. He actually has already, but he's not entirely conscious.
What is very pressing for people here is the cost of living.
Yes.
Energy bills in particular. They are predicted to go up even more, another £500 in October, which could bring the energy bill, the average energy bill, to more than £3,000 a year. If you are the next Prime Minister, are you going to give people money to help them pay for them?
So the first thing I've already spoken about is bringing down fuel cost, because we already know fuel underpins so much of our economy. And so, yes, that's exactly what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be lowering the cost of the duty on fuel by 10 pence a litre. The second thing I've already spoken about is looking at how we support people in their homes, because the reality is a lot of the talk at the moment is jam tomorrow, but what we really need is heat by Christmas. So that's exactly where I'm looking.
But very simply, are you going to give people money to help them with those energy bills?
Yes, and that's where the welfare reforms that I'm talking about come from, because what we really need to be doing is not just playing at giving money here and taking money there. What we need to be doing is setting out a lower tax agenda so that it makes sure that people who earn more keep more. And that's where universal credit really needs to be improved, so that those who are earning as they require benefits just to help them out of a difficult patch actually get the benefit and then improve their lives for themselves.
So
because conservative policies, fundamentally conservative policies, are about the freedom of the individual. They're about liberty. What we get with Labour is we get control, 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 and we need to get away from those brownite policies. We need to get away from that type of economics into liberty.
In very simple terms, somebody who's looking at a bill of more than £3,000 next year and thinking, I just cannot afford to do that, how much will you be giving them and how will you be paying for that?
Well, the government has already set out £1,200, which is about the increase that most people would see. So that's where the government sits at the moment. Now,
but what about you as Prime Minister?
Well, what I'd be looking to do is to make sure that the welfare system works, to reward people, to enable people to survive those difficult times ahead, because Christmas is going to be very, very difficult for many. Now, I know you've just been speaking to Thomas White about about the heat today, and it's quite difficult for many people already, because this heat is going to be extremely oppressive. But we do need to be thinking about when winter's coming, and that's why foreign policy is so fundamentally important, because if we can put Putin on the back foot, if we can liberate those gas fields that he has been dominating, if we can come back to a proper relationship with other countries around the world, then we can actually lower the price of energy for everyone.
Let me talk about your tax pledges. You want to reverse the national insurance rise. That costs £13 billion a year. You want to
about 6, actually.
You want to cut fuel duty by 10%. Is that another 10% or 5% more?
It's 10% off what it is now.
10
pence off what it is now.
10 pence of what it is now. What do you expect the total cost of those tax policies to be?
Well, we've costed them all within the £30 billion that the OBR says is remaining, and that's what the Chief Secretary to the Treasury says
is the headroom.
This is the headroom, exactly right.
But the headroom, as you know, is something that is forecast to be there, but that is a forecast. It's a prediction, isn't it? And it's not necessarily going to be there, and it could change just like that. You could suddenly find that £30 billion is not there.
It's entirely possible that forecasts change, but the reality is you have to live life on the basis of forecasts. That's why we have the OBR. And the reality is that what the OBR has forecast has actually been exceeded in many recent months, because the inflation rate means that the tax take has gone up.
The IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, says that a serious candidate would not be relying on headroom.
Well, I'm afraid I disagree. I think what we need to be doing is we need to be making sure that what we are doing is helping people today, because we can talk about jam tomorrow as much as you like, when the reality for many people is it's difficult to afford bread today.
What about increasing defence spending to 3% of GDP? How will you pay for that? Are you going to borrow it?
Well, that's an incremental rise, and actually that's where we need to be making sure that we're delivering across the whole of the United Kingdom. Because defence isn't just about facing off enemies like the Russians in Ukraine. What it's also about is investing in the United Kingdom. If you want a new deal for Britain, if you want to invest in parts of the United Kingdom like Cumbria, where we build our submarines, or indeed in many other parts of the country where we build incredibly advanced pieces of technology, you need to be investing in defence. And defence also trains people incredibly well. It's a brilliant, brilliant way of bringing our country together and making sure young people have an opportunity in a different way.
Let me talk to you about Rwanda, because you're offering a clean start. You do want to keep the policy, don't you, of sending asylum seekers to Rwanda?
Let's be absolutely clear. It is a totem that is necessary.
OK, and it's costing the taxpayer £120 million in an upfront payment. Not a single person has been sent there yet. Is it good value for the taxpayer?
The way it will work is by showing extremely clearly that Britain simply does not tolerate the human trafficking and the misery of slavery. And that's why we are stopping it. That's why we're making it so clear. Because what we're seeing with this human trafficking is a form of modern slavery. Now, it's not alone, and Priti Patel has been extremely honest about this and very clear about this. We need to do more. We need to close down the routes through Libya.
But it's not working at the moment, is it? Because it's supposed to be a deterrent. 607 people came across the Channel at the start of this month alone.
It's only just started.
Well, it hasn't started. Nobody's been sent to Rwanda yet.
The policy has only just been introduced. So can we just let it start, first of all? What we also need to do, however, is we need to close down the routes through Libya. And this is where we need to be extremely clear that those North African routes simply cannot continue. Now, I've already met with various Libyan leaders to talk about this, because what we need to be doing is making sure that the Royal Navy is guarding that North African coast, helping our Italian and French partners, and making sure that those traffickers don't get access to the Mediterranean.
But it is supposed to be acting as a deterrent, and as I've just said, it is not acting as a deterrent. The policy is in place, even though people haven't been, nobody's been sent yet. 607 people came over in the first week of July. We're almost double what we were this time last year. It's not working, is it?
Well, as I say, it's literally only just started, Sophie. I mean, it'd be a bit surprising if the deterrent was acting.
Well, surely people would be put up.
Deterrents only start working once you see that they are working, and at the moment this policy has barely been introduced. So I'm afraid I'm going to give it a little bit more time.
Let me just ask you a few quick-fire questions. We did this last week with Sajid Javid and Jeremy Hunt. Would you intervene if China invaded Taiwan?
Would definitely support our Japanese and Philippine and Indonesian allies, yes.
So you'd intervene. Would you leave the European Convention on Human Rights?
No.
Will you build the whole of HS2? And that includes northern legs beyond Crewe to Leeds and Manchester.
The point of HS2 is to level up the whole of the United Kingdom and to connect our great union. So yes, I would make sure that the HS2 tracks went all the way to Scotland.
Are you fully committed to net zero by 2050?
I'm fully committed to net zero. What I need now is the policy and the planning to make sure it works, and at the moment nobody's set that out.
Would you privatise Channel 4?
No.
Are there any circumstances in which you would allow another referendum on Scottish independence?
It's a generational decision. A generation hasn't passed.
Would you work for a Prime Minister who has broken the law?
I've been very clear about my policies on all of this, and I think that what we need to be doing is making sure that we bring back integrity into politics. And that's why I've spoken about bringing back a Ministerial Standards Commissioner.
That's not yes or no. Would you work for a Prime Minister who's broken the law?
Well, if you mean you're trying to have a go at Rishi Sunak.
I'm not having a go, it's a simple question.
No,
I'm not having a go at Rishi Sunak. I'm asking you whether you would work for a Prime Minister who has broken the law.
Well, I haven't worked for this one.
The truth is that you are very unlikely, really, to be the next Prime Minister. You have the power over the 32 backers, the 32 MPs who put their support.
I have no power over...
Well, you would hope that you have their support at least. Do you think that the next Prime Minister has to come from outside Boris Johnson's cabinet?
I think what we need to see is a clean start, and frankly that's, I think, the most essential issue, because in 2 years' time we're going to be facing Keir Starmer in a general election. And we need to make sure that all the attack lines that have been used against us for the last 3 years don't come back in a general election. We need to make sure absolutely that what we're able to deliver is champion Conservative policies and deliver a Conservative vision of the future. Because there are fantastic Conservative MPs around the country today who are delivering for their communities. There are councillors who are delivering today, who are delivering a Conservative future. And it would be wrong to undermine them because we make the wrong decision in Westminster.
Tom Tugendhat, thank you very much for joining me this morning. Now, thanks to the global success of Game of Thrones, Emilia Clarke went from being little known to world famous even before the first season of the hit show had ended. Her London stage debut this month sees her playing a young, struggling actress in a newly imagined version of The Seagull by Anton Chekhov. I met up with Emilia recently and we talked firstly about how much fame had changed her career and how Game of Thrones helped her overcome a life-threatening health crisis.
I'm not here to murder. And all I want to destroy is the wheel that has rolled over rich and poor, to the benefit of no one but the Cersei Lannisters of the world. I offer you a choice. Bend the knee and join me. Together, we will leave the world a better place than we found it. Or refuse. And die.
I was not recognised as much because I have dark hair and I obviously wore a platinum wig for the show. So I'd be often taking the photos for Kit. They'd be like, "Can you take this picture?" I'm like, "Of course I can. Absolutely I can." Brilliant. So I kind of got to hide a little bit, which was helpful. And I had a couple of brain hemorrhages, and that kind of, you know, you gain a lot of perspective, and it puts your head in a different place when dealing with the kind of juggernaut of being on a successful show.
I got obviously reel back a little bit there because you just threw in. I had a couple of brain hemorrhages.
I tend to do that.
But that, I mean, that what happened to you was awful. I mean, you had 2 brain hemorrhages, didn't you?
Yeah.
Which are effectively strokes. It's a stroke, and you had one, and then you had one 2 years later. What was that? 2011, 2013?
Yeah, 2011 and 2013.
And did you just collapse? I mean, what happened?
Just the most excruciating pain. Huge vomiting, trying to regain consciousness, trying to stay. I kept asking myself all these questions. I hilariously kept saying lines from the show in my head because I knew, for some reason, I must have watched it on Tomorrow's World at some point in my life, that if you're throwing up and you have a headache, then that's not good for your brain.
And you were so young to have that.
Yeah. So I was, what, 22? 23, 22? But it was incredibly helpful having Game of Thrones to sweep me up and give me that, like, purpose.
And the impact on you physically?
The amount of my brain that is no longer usable, it's remarkable that I am able to speak, sometimes articulately, and live my life completely normally with absolutely no repercussions. I am in the really, really, really small minority of people that can survive that.
Because you'd never know. I mean, talking to you would never know. And you've seen a scan of your brain, haven't you?
Yeah, and there's quite a bit missing.
Literally, really?
Yeah, which always makes me laugh. Yes, yeah. Because strokes, basically, as soon as any part of your brain doesn't get blood for a second, it's gone. And so the blood finds a different route to get around. But then whatever bit it's missing is therefore gone. It just kind of shows how little of our brains we actually use.
How do you just keep going with that knowledge? I mean, do you just stop thinking about it?
I can do a 2.5-hour play every single night and not forget a line. And I always had a good memory because it is the only thing. It is the only skill as an actor. That's all you have to do. You just have to remember some lines. So your memory is obviously incredibly important, and I consistently tested that. But I gave up wondering because I thought, well, this is who you are. This is the brain that you have. So there's no point in kind of continually racking your brains as to what might not be there, because what you have now is great. So let's work with that.
Extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary, and amazing that you've got the confidence and the courage, and you can still do it, and the memory to, you know, stand here and perform in front of all these people in the Seagull. The character you're playing, Nina, craves fame, doesn't she? More than anything. I mean, she says, I'll go through poverty, I'll go through anything in order to have fame.
Yes.
I presume that is not how you feel about fame.
No. That's actually been the biggest. It's fascinating getting to explore this character within that kind of mentality of what is it that brings people to think that fame is going to make everything better? It looks just sort of so enticing. How could someone not want to experience that for themselves? And then you do, and it sucks.
So fame isn't quite what you thought it would be. What about being on stage? Because obviously you were desperate to be on the stage. Is that what you thought it would be?
Yes.
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 In what way?
It's the greatest feeling in the world. It's so magical, and it's different every single night, and it's just this rush that I can't get enough of.
And why did you choose this role? Because this is your West End debut, isn't it? I mean, you could have done, you know, with the Game of Thrones behind you, you could have really done all kinds of things, couldn't you? You could have done the big sort of extravaganzas, you could have done but it's a small theatre, it's a very intimate production, and it's a very stripped back set. Why this role?
The opportunity to play Nina in The Seagull on the West End stage with a lauded, applauded, incredible director like Jamie Lloyd, I was like, well, it's been a kind of profound experience, I really have to say, because it's daring, taking such a beloved and well-known play like this and putting it in such a modern, stripped-back, bare. You can't hide behind a prop, you can't lean on something, you can't, you know, all these sort of like little tells that as actors you have to kind of calm your nerves down sometimes, where you're like, I'll just pour a glass of something, or sort of, you know, move somehow, make the bed. You don't have those opportunities to lean on, so you literally just have to just stand there and give the audience everything that you can to serve the story that we're trying to tell. And that's tricky, but it's why you do theatre. It's so exciting.
And what a place to do it. Well, very good luck with it. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you, thanks.
The lovely Emilia Clarke there. And that production of The Seagull is at the Harold Pinter Theatre in London. Emilia founded a charity to help people who have experienced brain injuries like those that she was talking about in that interview. And it focuses on emotional and mental health recovery for people who have been through similar traumas. So if you want to find out more about it, her charity is called Same You. Now, what do we know about our final guest this morning? She has stayed loyal, on the surface at least, to Boris Johnson and still serves in his government. She was a magician's assistant as a teenager to help make ends meet. She was a contestant in Tom Daley's reality TV diving show Splash. And we know that if she makes it through to the final two, she is the favourite to become the next Prime Minister. But there's a lot we don't know. As the country faces a cost of living crisis, an NHS crisis, a war in Ukraine, does she have what it takes to deal with it? Penny Mordaunt joins me now. Good morning.
Morning.
Let's start with energy bills and these predictions that they could go up by £1,200 a year in October, up to more than £3,000. What are you going to do to help people? Are you going to give money to people to help them pay those?
In this contest, I've acknowledged that we will have to do something this autumn. That is the priority for the people that we serve. We are in this contest picking their Prime Minister, and we should be focused on those issues. I've not set out detailed tax and spend in this contest. That's the wrong place to do it. But I'm expecting and anticipating that we will have to do something else this autumn.
Is it the wrong place to do it? Because you potentially could be Prime Minister in just 2 months' time. 2 months is not a long time away at all. Why is it the wrong place to do it when you could be having to make these decisions in just weeks?
I've set out some very clear principles under which I would operate. So how are we going to get growth back in the economy? How we ensure that we can compete in the world? I have said that we would do some targeted support now, but it's absolutely vital that we do this in a way that is sensible and recognises the very, very volatile situation in the economy. This contest is not the place to do it. That needs to be done at a proper fiscal event, and we've got to demonstrate our competence. This contest is in danger of slipping into something else, and I think that we have to run this contest as we would govern.
But people want to know how much help they're going to get now, don't they? And people are struggling already, and they look at the prospect of more than £3,000 a year bills. Is the message from you, Penny Mordaunt, the potential new Prime Minister, I'm not going to tell you if you're going to get any more help?
No, I've said it's a priority. All I've been talking about in this contest is cost of living, is getting people access to GPs and dentists, the things that matter to them and how we're going to get growth back in the economy. But what we do need to do is look at those particular issues that are really terrifying people. You know, I know what that's like, really terrifying them. And we also have to look at some of the things that it's adding additional cost onto bills.
And when you're worried about things like that, you do want the detail, don't you? You do want to know what is going to be done and if you're going to get any help, just so you can actually reassure yourself and plan ahead. Let's talk about the detail that you have given already. You have said that you will halve VAT on petrol. That's from 20% to 10%. And you said that you would raise basic and middle income tax thresholds in line with inflation. They've just been frozen for 4 years. What is the total cost of those policies?
So the first is neutral. The second, based on Red Book calculations,
Why is it neutral?
under, because you're getting additional revenues into the exchequer on fuel. But the second, you would have to adjust our forecast there. The reason why I've done that is because I think we have to demonstrate that there needs to be some immediate targeted support going to people. But in terms of corporation tax, other taxes, this is not the place to do that. I've set out the principles under which I would operate, but not the levels.
But I mean, raising tax thresholds, for example, that means less money for the government, doesn't it? The government just gets less in tax receipts.
We would have to adjust, particularly for the second policy, our tax forecasts. But that is absolutely necessary, I think. It needs to be done now. Other things can wait until the autumn, but I think we do need to set out some immediate things that we would do on day one.
So you accept then that the government's getting less money if you're raising the tax thresholds. That also then means that you're going to have to make cuts to pay for that. What are you going to cut?
No, not on the policies that I've announced. There will need to be some decisions taken at a proper fiscal event this autumn, but I do think that it is not responsible to set out entirely new tax policies or even an entirely different direction from what we've been doing 5 minutes ago. This is not about just what I think. It's about our party as a whole and the direction of travel of our policy. I think people want to get back to proper Conservative policies, but that needs to be arrived at through a proper process.
But tax cuts, very simply, you make a tax cut, it has to be paid for either by borrowing more or by cutting elsewhere, so government departments, health, education, whatever it is, defence, wherever it is you're going to make cuts. What are you going to do? Are you going to borrow more money then?
This is about, the second policy is about our forecasts. We will have to adjust those. But it's very interesting how people frame this. We're not going to be taking people's money off them. It's got to be a recognition that people need some immediate help now.
What does it mean? What does it actually mean, though? Just to be very clear with people, you're going to adjust your forecast. What does that actually mean?
It means that we're obviously not going to be taking some additional revenue off people, but that is
But you might
set
make
out
cuts
in
elsewhere. So departments which have been planned for, budgets that have been planned, you might have to cut back on those. Education, for example.
No, there is headroom to do this, plenty of headroom to do this, because the Exchequer is getting greater receipts. I have made, this is compared to other candidates, a very modest set of targeted support I've announced to help people. What I'm not going to do is talk about the detail of what we might do later, although I recognise things like some of the environmental levies, some of the ways that we approach energy, for example, is very difficult.
Do you recognise as well, though, that the headroom that you're talking about, and I've just been talking about it with Tom Tugendhat as well, that's the £30 billion, but that is based on predictions. It's not money that is actually there, and that could change like that.
Well, that is why I'm the only candidate that has set out some very modest policies now. You're right, Sophie, this is an incredibly volatile situation, which is why any further decisions on tax and spend needs to be taken through a proper process after this contest. This contest is not the place to do that.
But people do need to hear what you are planning to do as Prime Minister if you make it to number 10. What about fiscal rules? Rishi Sunak set himself 2 fiscal rules. That debt should be falling as a proportion of GDP. In 3 years' time, the second one, that government should not borrow to fund day-to-day spending. Are you going to be sticking to those fiscal rules?
I've said I would do the first. But again, Sophie, this is not about rewriting an entire manifesto. all of us stood on a manifesto which we have yet to deliver, and we've also not fully delivered on the 2016 referendum. We've not got that Brexit dividend back for people. That is what we need to do. I'm not here to tear everything up.
No.
We've done a lot of good stuff that has never got any airtime because of everything that's been going on in Westminster.
But what I am just trying to get is the detail, and I do think you've just given us something there. So you're saying that you will stick to the first of the former Chancellor's fiscal rules, but not the second. So you will be borrowing for day-to-day spending.
Yes, but we will have to do that for some time. The important thing is that our debt that debt ratio will fall as a percentage over time.
But you know already, I mean, just how much our debt is huge already. Just to service that debt, the interest payments is £83 billion a year. For the whole of education, it costs about £99 billion. You want to make the debt, just the interest payments, even higher?
No, we have got to get spending under control, but all of these decisions need to be taken when we are in government. They cannot be done during this contest.
It's inflationary though as well, isn't it? And inflation right now is soaring.
Yes, and we do need to bring that under control. I think other candidates have spoken about what they would do with the Bank of England. I'm not intending on taking powers back from them. That will be their role. They will remain independent.
How is borrowing more money going to bring inflation under control?
Well, as I said, the Bank of England will not have its remit removed by me. I know other candidates have said that is the case. But we do need to, one of the only levers we have is controlling expenditure, but also we need to, the other equation on this is growth. And we need to be introducing some supply side reforms that are actually going to deliver that Brexit dividend I spoke about.
The NHS at the moment, the pay review bodies are going to come back. It's just public sector workers get 5% pay rise. Would you accept that, or do they deserve a bigger rise?
Again, I'm not. I know you're going to ask me a lot of questions, Sophie, important questions that people want answers to. I haven't just arrived at this point. We have had a government in place that has been doing a lot of things to deliver a manifesto that we stood on. We have processes to arrive at public sector pay, decide all sorts of things. There are reviews going on. I'm not going to rip all that up. I'm not going to come on your programme and make decisions that should be taken as part of a team when we're in government.
You're not the best known candidate, at least you definitely weren't until this week. Do you represent a fresh start for the Conservative Party?
I think what people want is an end to the toxic politics we've seen over the last few months. They want someone that can restore trust, and they want someone that does have some competence and experience. I think I'm that candidate, and you will see that in the campaign that I'm running. I've taken a different approach. I'm not completely ripping up everything we're doing and saying that I would do things radically different in the future. I'm doing this in a proper, sensible way, and I'm talking about the issues that the public care about.
The leadership race at the moment has been primarily about the economy, and as you say, it is also about trust and honesty. I want to take you back to something that you said some time ago now, but it was 2016. It was the referendum, the Brexit campaign. You were one of the key voices of that Leave campaign. One claim that you made here on this programme to Andrew Marr was that Turkey was going to join the EU, meaning that 1 million more people were going to come here from Turkey over 8 years. I'm just going to play you quickly the exchange that you had with Andrew Marr. And this was on the 22nd of May 2016.
The British government does have a veto on Turkey joining, so we don't have to let them join.
No, it doesn't. We are not going to be able to have say the British people
I
aren't
thought
going
accession was something that each country could veto if it wanted to.
No, I do not think that the EU is going to keep Turkey out. I think it is going to join. I think the migrant crisis is pushing it more that way.
We did have a veto over Turkey joining the EU. Do you now accept that that was misleading?
No. First of all, I'm very proud to have fought for Brexit, to campaign for it, to vote for it, and to have helped deliver it. And that is a classic example of the campaign that we were up against. David Cameron had given undertakings to Turkey that we would support, the United Kingdom would support its accession to the EU. Just because there's a provision in a treaty doesn't mean that the UK could ever have used that. And to have gone back on what was government policy and those undertakings he had given to Turkey, a key NATO ally, would have been crazy. But the point that I made on that clip, and I feel very strongly about, is that the British people did not have a say. They did have a say in the referendum, and they chose.
It was a fact that the UK did have a veto, wasn't it? Member states' right to a veto is spelled out in Article 49 of the Treaty on the EU. We claim we did not. You claim we did not have a veto. Do you accept that what you said at the time was misleading?
No,
but it's in Article 49.
No, we didn't, Sophie, have a veto because we couldn't use that provision in the treaty. And the clip says it as I see it. The British people did not have a say.
I'm talking about actual facts, so that's not the fact. That isn't the actual facts. The actual facts is we did have a veto. The UK had a veto. It was in the treaty.
Which we could have never used.
We could have never. It was a fact that we had. We did have it, though.
We could never have used it.
Why?
You can't say to a country that's one of your key partners, we will support you, and then not. I'm sorry, You're dancing
around the detail here, though. The actual fact is...
It's like 2016 all over again. This is why people were so fed up with being in the EU, because there were important things that were happening that they felt they had no control over. That's why they wanted powers to be given back to the United Kingdom. What we also want, though, is to maximise the opportunities that have come from leaving the EU. That is the job we still have to do. And I can tell you, if we don't win the next general election, all of the work we've done to date will be for nothing.
I need to ask you, obviously, about the other story that is dominating your campaign at the moment. It's on the front pages. People's right to legally change their gender. You've been accused of changing your mind on this, so I just want to give you the chance to completely clear it up now. Quite simply, do you think trans people should have to get a diagnosis of gender dysphoria before they can legally change their gender?
Yes, and if you look at the article in the Sunday Times today, that is stated very clearly in that document. This has been rebutted many times, and I have to say, we all know what's going on, and as I say, this is the type of toxic politics that people want to get away from. The poor British public have a month of this to go. They've got a month of us choosing their Prime Minister, and it's an opportunity for our party to show ourselves at our best, and we should be talking and focusing on the issues that concern them.
So if you did believe that, so you just to be very clear, you think that trans people should have to get a diagnosis of gender dysphoria before they can legally change their gender. It's a question that has been put to you a lot, and particularly on Friday. So if you did believe that, when you were Equalities Minister in Theresa May's government, the policy then was to get rid of it. Why did you not say something then?
It wasn't to get rid of it. We did a consultation. We asked healthcare professionals what they thought about the situation, and that is the section that I looked after. I managed that consultation. We didn't actually, on my shift, produce a policy. All of this is, I'm afraid, there's a number of smears going on in the papers. That's not representative of how my party operates. My colleagues are very angry and upset that this is how the leadership contest is being dragged down. And I think that all candidates ought to be demonstrating what they're going to be like in government in this contest.
Let me ask you,
that means focusing on people's issues, it means being positive, it means having integrity.
OK, let's just do a quick fire section of questions. We just did the same with Tom Tugendhat. Are there any circumstances in which you would allow another referendum on Scottish independence?
It's a settled question.
So?
It's a settled question.
Yes or no?
No.
Are you committed to net zero by 2050?
Yes, I am, but it has to not clobber people. It's got to support levelling up and our resilience and security.
Will you privatise Channel 4?
Not a priority for me, doesn't help with the cost of living.
So that's no?
It's not a priority.
Would you give Boris Johnson a cabinet position?
I'm not talking about jobs. I'm just not talking about any jobs.
Yes or no?
Don't think he would be around to serve.
Will you withdraw from the UK from the European Convention on Human Rights?
No.
You are, as we know, you have been the bookie's favourite, the most popular candidate with members so far. If you don't get to the final two, and we should know by Wednesday. Is there a problem with the system?
I think we need to put the best two forward. That's what I would say to my colleagues. We need to win a general election. Look at the person that does best, not just against other candidates, but against Keir Starmer. And we should put the best two to the country. We're picking the Prime Minister of this country. That should be our focus. And we should stop all of this toxic politics that the public and all of us are so fed up with, and make this a positive contest and build a team.
Penny Mordaunt, thank you very much. And that is it from us here on Sunday morning. The last time you will hear this iconic music. And that is also it from me. When I stepped into Andrew Marr's shoes back in January, I never imagined we'd be dealing with a war in Europe and the end of this Boris Johnson era. Extraordinary times. It has been a privilege to be with you throughout them. Laura Kuenssberg will be here with a brand new programme at the same time on BBC One in September. I hope you'll join her then. But from all of us here, goodbye.